Hey everybody, I'm Brian Enton in for Ashleigh tonight. We knew something big was going to happen today in the Long Island serial killer case, but we did not expect accused killer Rex Heuermann to actually speak to the judge. That has never happened before, but he started talking during the court proceeding. Now, first of all, there was a new charge added. That's the reason he was in court in the first place. Heuermann is now charged with yet another murder, now brings the total to 7. It's a terrible case. Prosecutors say he decapitated and dismembered a 24-year-old. And once again, it was the hair. It was the hair that helped link him to this additional case, now the 7th case. But it is what Heuermann said that caused people in the courtroom to literally gasp. No one expected it. Again, he has been silent in the past, and today he just started talking. We're going to take you inside the courtroom, tell you exactly what he said. We've got a reporter, Laura. She was inside. She'll give us all the details. That's coming up in just a minute. Also tonight, things went pretty quiet for a while with the murder of Kansas mom's case. You remember, it's the awful story of the 2 women killed by the God's Misfits group. I was out in Oklahoma and Kansas for almost a month covering it, but we hadn't heard many updates for quite some time. Well, it is quiet no more. There was big drama. Big drama today in court. There's all the suspects right there. One of the suspects actually flipped, described step by step how the women were murdered. Said all of it in court today, and it was brutal. Hit so hard with a hammer, we learned, that the hammer actually broke. And that was just the beginning of the torture in this case. We got all the details. Once again, we were inside the courtroom. We're going to break it all down for you coming up. And later in the show, more on our investigation into the 2022 UFO sighting by a police officer in Connecticut. I went out there last night. We showed you. We found another witness, corroborated everything that the police officer said. Tonight, we're going to show you that these sightings, they actually go back decades. We didn't expect to find that out when we went to Connecticut. But turns out there are more photos and that the details actually date back all the way to the 1960s. And there's been sighting after sighting after sighting, all at the same reservoir. We're going to show you exactly what we found out coming up later in the show. But we begin tonight in Long Island, where alleged serial killer Rex Heuermann did something today that he'd never done in the 17 months since his arrest. At a packed courtroom, they literally gasped when it happened. Heuermann was back in court to face yet another murder charge. This is now his 7th. And not only did he speak out loud, which was very, very rare in itself, he said a complete sentence. This is what he said. He said, "Your Honor," he said, "I am not guilty of any of these charges." He said he's not guilty. Too bad for him. The grisly details and evidence that came with the new indictment, they are not the kind that you can easily talk your way out of. And before I get into them, fair warning for you tonight, this is graphic and this is highly disturbing. The other cases were disturbing. This sort of takes it to the next level with this 7th victim. The latest of Heuermann's alleged victims is Valerie Mack. That's this young woman's name. She was 24 years old. You see her picture right there, when she went missing in New Jersey in the spring or summer of 2000. It was in November of that year. Her corpse was found. She was decapitated. She was dismembered, and she was found on eastern Long Island, just like the others. Her head, her hands, and 1 foot would not be found for 11 more years. And they found those items near Gilgo Beach, which was about 50 miles away. Now, her name wasn't known for years after that until 2020, when Valerie Mack was identified through forensic genealogy. And now we're figuring out exactly what ties Mack to Heuermann. Prosecutors say hairs. It was hairs again, found on Mack's wrist, match Heuermann's wife and daughter. Now, neither of them are suspects, of course. The state alleges Heuermann killed most, if not all, of his victims in the family home while everyone else was away. Prosecutors also cite what they claim was Heuermann's significant collection of violent, bondage, and torture pornography. That's what they called it, torture porn, dating back to 1994. Allegedly that collection includes images of breast mutilation and women bound with rope, which are consistent with injuries inflicted on Mack. All the puzzle pieces coming together, and again, it was the hair. Now, finally, there's the so-called planning document. We've talked about the planning document before. It was found on one of the 350 devices investigators seized from Heuermann's home and office. You remember, here's the aerials right now from the helicopter. They were there for weeks looking through every little thing. The manual was a highly detailed how-to that mentions ropes and cords and saws and refers to the very road where Valerie Mack's body was found on as a dump site. That's what he called it, a, quote, dump site. I want to go now to NewsNation senior correspondent Laura Ingle. She was in court all day for all of this. She's been covering the case since the very, very beginning. Laura, first of all, I mean, what did you think when he started speaking in court? Because I know I talked to you a couple of days ago. We expected perhaps another victim today, but I don't think anyone expected him to speak out like that, Laura.
We didn't, Brian. It was certainly a very big surprise, and also it was unsolicited. The judge didn't ask him a question when we suddenly heard him speak. We were kind of in the middle of the court proceeding when it happened, and he kind of blurted out those words that you mentioned, Your Honor, I am not guilty of any of these charges. But he said it right after everyone had just been handed the superseding indictment. So imagine, if you will, the DA's office hands us all the paperwork that comes along with the superseding indictment, which I want to talk about in a second. So we're going through page after page. The courtroom falls silent, and everybody's turning the pages, and that's the only sound that you can hear. And we're now seeing for the first time some of the really grisly details of Valerie Mack's murder, allegedly at the hands of Rex Heuermann. So when he says this declarative sentence, it came as a surprise, and then for the first time, we had Valerie Mack's family members in there. I don't know if any words were spoken, but you could hear kind of this groan and this gasp that happened in the courtroom, like, yeah, right, was the kind of feeling. And it was certainly very jarring when it happened, Brian.
Yeah, certainly strange to hear him say that while you're at the same time reading the new indictment. And I saw your Instagram video. It did seem like a dramatic moment. They literally walked down the line and just handed out the indictment to everyone, and then you were able to read it for the first time. What do we know about this latest victim? What have we learned about her?
Yeah, Valerie Mack has been on the radar of this investigation and those of us covering it for many, many years. But she was Jane Doe for a really long time, as you mentioned, recently identified through genetic genealogy. And I think all of the victims it's all terrible. Every single victim has a really sad story of how they ended, how their lives were ended. But with Valerie Mack, she had a very troubled past. She had a troubled childhood. She was in foster care. She was adopted. She had a son when she was 18 years old, when she was a senior in high school, fell into drugs, according to those who knew her, and then into sex work. And then, of course, she goes missing, and we have this horrific outcome where she is found dismembered in two different places on Long Island. And one of the really jarring things here, you mentioned that planning document, Brian. So as you look at the planning document of the to-do list, right, the to-do list for all the things that he wants to make sure, allegedly, that he takes care of, one of them is removing identifying tattoos, removing any marks that you could identify a person with. And Valerie Mack, as we learn in this superseding indictment, had many mutilations on her body. And in fact, one sad fact is that she had her son's name tattooed on her ankle, and that was the foot that was cut off.
So that was likely the reason the foot was cut off, so that they wouldn't be able to identify her. And I just keep thinking back to the fact this was a respected architect. This was a guy who had a family, lived out on Long Island, commuted every day into the city for work. There were TV stories about this guy. I mean, he had this just twisted, disgusting double life, according to police. What about his wife, though? Because I've always been intrigued, Laura, with your other stories, that the cameras follow her in. She's got a documentary crew. She was making big money with the documentary, and the hustle and bustle of her going in every time. Was she there today? What's the latest with her?
You know what? She wasn't, and we were expecting to see her. Her name is Asa Ellerup, and we were expecting that she most likely would be here because we knew it was going to be such a big day. The Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney had made an announcement the day before that something significant was going to happen, but it turns out she wasn't there. We were expecting to see her and her adult daughter and son. I did get a statement from Robert Macedonio, her attorney today, who said this to NewsNation, that he would like to repeat once again that Asa Ellerup has no knowledge of the crimes that Rex is charged with. She's not a suspect and never has been a suspect in any of the homicides. And the only information that Ms. Ellerup has of these alleged crimes is what has been reported in the media. She does not believe Rex was capable of committing the crimes he's accused of, and she will attend the trial and withhold judgment until she sees and hears the evidence in court. And one other thing about the superseding indictment, Brian, I wanted to show you and our viewers. As we were going through it, one of the things that was brought up today by Ray Tierney, the Suffolk County DA, is that when they went through the home and they went through his office, they found a lot of press clippings about this case. It doesn't mean he's guilty, but it's really interesting, and it's actually embedded in the superseding indictment. People Magazine, local news clippings, one after the other in this indictment. And they say that it's interesting because he was very active on the Gilgo News on the website when Valerie Mack was about to be identified, when there was a lot of activity about that particular victim. So they made note of the dates that they have all of these devices, right, that he had, been online, he had been searching. He wasn't only searching for all of that pornography and torture material, he was also following this investigation very closely, watching the documentaries, looking at all of this evidence, and now we see it in the indictment as well.
Yeah, it's always kind of a bonus when you get the photos in the indictment like that. Real quick, you were just mentioning that the wife said she doesn't believe that her husband could have done this. He's now in court today saying, I didn't do this. Has there been any indication of what his defense might be? Because when you read these indictments and you look at all the evidence connected back to the house and the hair, I mean, it's hard to imagine that what kind of defense could he have?
Well, if you were to listen to defense attorney Mike Brown today, and as he has at every single court case where he's come out and talked to the press, he said, look, this evidence isn't well tested in terms of how it can be admitted into court. And that's one of the things he's asking the judge to do, is to have another hearing after the first of the year to talk about this DNA evidence. He's like, what? All of a sudden there's DNA evidence? This is this evidence that ties my client to these people, and it's just one hair? And he was really making a lot about that today. And there does need to be what's called a Fry hearing to discuss the admissibility of this type of technology that was used, and if it can be used here in the state of New York moving forward. No trial date set, two court dates set for January and February of next year on this case.
Interesting. Yeah, right. And then 7 victims now. You just have to wonder, is the number just going to keep on going up? It seems like it's going in that direction. Laura Ingle, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you. I want to bring in now Catherine Ramsland. Dr. Ramsland, she is a forensic psychologist and author of several books, including The Serial Killer's Apprentice, How Houston's Deadliest Murderer Turned a Kid into a Killing Machine. It's always nice to see Dr. Ramsland. I think she's basically written more books. Every time we introduce you, it's like a different book. You've written more books than anybody else, and they're all fabulous. But I want to ask you about what Rex Heuermann said in court. Unexpected, hasn't spoken out before, and said, I'm not guilty. Does it surprise you he chose today to just sort of blurt that out?
Well, I think he's been frustrated with not being able to say anything, because I think he has confidence in his ability to persuade and manipulate, and he wants people to see that he's confident, because charges are piling up and he hasn't had a chance to say anything yet.
Yeah, and what Laura was describing, the sort of planning document that they found on the computer, hundreds of pages of specific plans, and the fact that Heuermann cut off this new victim, Mac's right leg, with her son's name tattooed on it, to prevent identification. What does that tell you? I mean, to me, I think about there was real planning involved, I guess.
There's planning involved, but he's also reading books of how other people have done this to erase identifiers. And his planning document is also a journal of mistakes he's either made or he anticipates he could make if he's not careful. So it's a checklist, but it's also about make sure the rope is thick, because thin rope breaks. Get a lot of sleep, because if you're tired, you can't do this as long as you want to. So he has a lot of instructions to himself that are based on the potential for making mistakes.
So do you think he was just writing those things for himself, like for himself to go back over and read, or do you think he wanted to send that out at some point to other people?
Oh, that's a good question. I do kind of think there might be another person or more involved, or at least have knowledge of this, But it wouldn't surprise me that it's just a list for him, because I've seen that before with other killers where they do keep checklists, they keep documentation, they read it over because it not only keeps them prepared, but reminds them of what they've achieved.
And this latest victim found at a dump site, that's what he called it, the dump site, same area as most of the other victims. What does that tell you? I mean, I would just think if he was trying to cover it up, wouldn't you spread the victims different places? But he's taking them all to the same place.
It's not entirely the same place, and he's treating them a bit differently, but it's about minimum effort and maximum protection. So he wants to be able to visit them potentially or know where they are, but he needs to hide them. He needs to carry them. And so he's going to be choosing places that he thinks will protect him, will hide the victims, but is not going to require a lot of effort on his part.
And, I mean, all the details are disturbing, but something about the torture porn sort of takes it to the next level. Apparently he was looking at the torture porn and carried it out on Valerie Mack. What does that mean? I mean, was he getting ideas from the torture porn? I mean, have you seen this in other cases?
Well, it starts with fantasy, his own fantasy. He finds porn that matches it and gives him new ideas. It's called decorating his fantasy with things maybe he hadn't thought of, but he likes and he wants to try. And the more he does that, the more he wants to actually do this to somebody, because he wants to experience the feeling of domination and control over another person. He wants to see their suffering. He wants to hear them scream. Because that's what he's reading about, and it's what he wants himself to do based on his own fantasy life.
You've covered so many of these killers. You know, I'm just thinking today he's in court saying not guilty. Do you think he'll stick with that? I mean, at some point, is there a thrill for them to come clean and sort of own up to what they did, or how do you see that part of it playing out?
Yeah, there is a tipping point for some of them where they realize the evidence is so strong, and maybe their family is trying to get them to please just plead this out and be done with it. And then they'll want to talk about it. They'll want to brag. They'll want to make sure they get credit for everything. But we haven't reached that tipping point with him yet.
Yeah, we still don't know if there's more victims too, which is going to be sad to follow. Dr. Ramsland, it's always nice to see you. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, still to come, a shocking twist, and this really was shocking, in another big murder case that we've been following most of the year. Today, two of the so-called God's Misfits, charged with killing two Kansas moms in the Oklahoma Panhandle, they flipped on the other suspects, right on the witness stand. And they just started spilling everything. They spilled details we've never heard before, all about the killings, the plannings, and the fact that one misfit was a last-minute addition to the plot. The details are so violent, what happened to these poor moms. We've got a reporter who is inside. That's next.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud to get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
Oklahoma tonight, a really just gut-wrenching look at the ambush murders of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly from not one, but two surprise prosecution witnesses. And what a surprise this was. As I'm sure you know, the victims were two moms from Kansas who were trying to pick up Butler's kids from their grandmother, Tiffany Adams. We've been calling her Grandma Tiffany. She had custody. Allegedly, Grandma Tiffany was the leader of a 5-member group that called itself God's Misfits, and that allegedly plotted and carried out the murders. Well, today, some of the misfits were in court, and two of them actually flipped on the others. Cora Twombly and Paul Grice took the stand and said exactly what the prosecutors wanted to hear. The Grandma Tiffany planned the whole thing to get Butler out of the picture so she could hang on to Butler's kids. It's what many people have suspected all along. Twombly said her husband and co-defendant Cole Twombly, who so far has not flipped, was added to the plot at the last minute when they realized that they needed a fifth helper. She said the plan was to divert and stop Butler's car, which we already knew, and then to drag Butler and whoever came with her into a livestock trailer where they would be stabbed to death. Kelly was a court-appointed visitation supervisor who happened to be filling in for the woman who usually covered Butler's visits. Cora said Butler and Kelly were stunned with tasers before they were knifed. So first they were stunned. This stuff is just, it's really bad. First they were stunned with the tasers, then they were knifed, and at one point Butler escaped from the trailer, was trying to get away, and that Grice went after her, tackled her, tased her into submission before she was killed. Grice's testimony brought the courtroom to tears as he admitted to shocking Butler with a taser, then striking her with a hammer. And again, we do a lot of tough stuff on this show, but this is very, very sad. The force of the blows from the hammer were so serious that the hammer actually broke in his hands. That's how violent this was. I want to stop here and bring in my colleague, Allison Weiner. She was in the courtroom for all of this today, is going to help me lay it out. Normally I'm there with Allison. Glad you were able to be there, though. I mean, this was a big one. This was a stunner. I mean, the fact that two of them flipped. Tell us more about what Cora Twombly, what she said on the stand.
Well, Cora was rather unemotional for most of it, except for when she was talking about how her daughter asked questions prior to the murder and how she told Kenzie as little as possible, but Kenzie put the pieces together. And she said that she was testifying and she was actually taking this plea deal in part because she wanted to keep Kenzie from having to testify. She talked about how her part, she kind of minimized a lot of her part in all of this, but she did was the lookout. She followed Veronica Butler's car from Kansas. Then she turned around and waited, and she was supposed to pick up the telephones of the victims and get rid of them. She actually hit them with a cinder block on the back of her truck, and then she put them in a special ammo container and then put tinfoil over the top. She did see Paul Grice running after Veronica Butler, and she testified about that today. But she also talked about how Tiffany was pretty much in charge of their little group. I mean, she did speak a lot about her and that they met 4 to 5 times prior to executing these two women.
And it was an execution based on everything that came out today. What was it like in the courtroom, Allison? Because I know the families are normally there, victims' family members, and there was an especially sort of traumatic moment today that almost caused an eruption in court. What happened?
Well, it did cause an eruption in court. What happened is Paul Grice was on the stand, and he starts very methodically, very in a lot of detail, talking about how he actually murdered Veronica Butler. And he talked about how he had to chase her out of the trailer, that he tackled her while he was trying to tase her. He numbed his own arm. Then he was on top of her. He didn't know what to do. He was starting to, his mind was melting down. It was just all a frenzy, and he started stabbing her. He pulled out his knife and started stabbing her. And it turns out that Cora Twombly saw that. She said she saw a motion that he was making of, with his arms going up and down. She assumed he was stabbing her. And then, as he discussed this, as he talked about it, he said that that Veronica, and this is the thing that this really was awful, that there was no more blinking. And that the light, came out of her eyes, and he fell to the ground. And he said that Grandma Tiffany, was walking around in a circle laughing. And it was the fullest laugh he had ever heard. And that's when Veronica's dad screamed out the word bitch about Tiffany. The whole courtroom was sobbing. It got so loud as Paul tried to continue on with his testimony. The judge stopped the proceedings. And he really took control of the courtroom. All the lawyers went up to the bench. Then he asked them to step back. They had a conference really quick. And the judge said, this is an American courtroom. These defendants are entitled to due process, just as the state is entitled to it. And he cautioned and told everyone that was sobbing. I mean, it really had become a cacophony of just like total grief in there. I've never heard anything like it.
Oh my gosh.
And they step outside if they couldn't, manage to control themselves, but nobody did leave.
Did they talk at all about motive? I mean, obviously they're pinning this somewhat on Grandma Tiffany, and she seemed like the ringleader from all the reporting that we've done of God's Misfits and of the group. But did they talk at all about why they were convinced by her to do this?
Cora kind of scoffed at the God's Misfits thing, saying that it really was just something Cole said about how they didn't fit in anywhere and that they were God's Misfits. But I'm not convinced about that testimony yet. Yes, there was a motive. They talked about how Tiffany had repeatedly, Paul Grice actually went on and on about this, that she told him she had evidence of the sexual abuse of Veronica's children by her brother. This is something that we had reported earlier, that they had a video where the brother confessed to the sexual abuse, and that Tad had a huge document, 30-page document that he kept locked in a safe at his house. And he said, I never asked to see anything, and that was my mistake. But that it was something that she preyed upon the hate in his heart for having been abused as a child as well, physically is what he alluded to, and that he did it, and he took responsibility for it. But Cora also talked about how it was heartbreaking and that she was sure the abuse was going to continue because the court system had not helped at all, except for having visitation. I mean, there was visitation with somebody, a supervisor. That's what Jillian Kelly was doing there.
So the fact, Allison, that these two have now turned and are testifying what seems like on behalf of the prosecution and telling the whole story of what they say happened, do we know, there's got to be a deal, right? Like, what's the motivation?
Oh, yeah,
now?
there were two. They both had a deal, and they had to mention it. Paul Grice took a deal so that he wouldn't have to be, he could escape the death penalty. And Cora Twombly has a suspended sentence. She'll serve at least 30 years in court.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to say is this whole thing about Jillian Kelly, it turns out that Grice also killed her, that he killed her in the in the trailer on his way to the burial site, that she looked like she was alive, and Grice said her eyelids were fluttering, and that he thought she's going to wake up alive in that freezer and it will be horrifying. So sort of intimating that it was out of pity, he stabbed her in the neck.
Yeah, and I remember, oh my God.
3 times.
I remember seeing the horse trailer. We went out there where they allegedly buried the freezer. I mean, if you can see this land, this is like right out of a horror movie. It's awful. So this was day one of the testimony. This is apparently going to go on for 2 more days. What else? It's already all this shocking stuff today. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
Well, I think it was shocking because we saw that different people weren't having preliminary hearings, and we didn't know that the reason Paul Grice's preliminary hearing was he wanted to go solo was because he had turned against everybody. Tomorrow, we're going to hear cross-examination of Paul Grice, so he's going to be somebody's going to, for the other defense attorneys, for the defendants that are in there, Cole and Tad. It's kind of interesting. It looks like Tiffany already declined. She actually waived her right to a preliminary hearing and also a speedy trial. So she didn't sit through it today. She was whisked out at the very beginning. Tomorrow, I think we're going to hear about the burial site, and we're going to hear from the owner of that land who leased it to Tad. And we're going to hear about what went down there. And I think it's going to be just as upsetting for the families. I've covered a lot of trials, and I know you have too. I've never seen anything like today.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a moment. No cameras allowed inside, but the cameras are allowed outside. That's why we've got the video. It's so bizarre. They walk each suspect in one by one, shackled. The whole thing in this courthouse and outside is all very, very strange. And then you add what happened in court today. It's just unbelievable. Allison Weiner, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Okay, bye.
Okay, still to come tonight, we were the first to bring you a Connecticut police officer's account of a UAP sighting in 2022. As it turns out, his encounter is nowhere near the first at that same reservoir. We went out there. Our investigation reveals strange objects have been seen in the skies there for decades. I'm talking since the 60s, and there's a detailed list of all the people who have seen something very, very similar. We're going to have more of our exclusive reporting from Connecticut next.
When you join Lesmos Plus, you unlock access to over 2,000 science-backed, endorphin-inducing workouts you'll actually enjoy. With exercises for every mood, every fitness level, and every goal, you can work out anytime, anywhere, on any device. Plus, sign up today and get 14 days free. Find the workout that's right for you. Choose happy and download the Lesmos Plus app today.
In Connecticut came forward with a UFO encounter from 2022 in the dead of night on a lonely road near a very, very strange reservoir. He said the object, it glowed bright green, then red, then orange, and hovered near his car before it zipped away. And his account is by no means the first in that area over the very same reservoir. For more than half a century, reports of strange encounters have been reported in the local papers. I went out there to see for myself. Here's more of our special report. This reservoir in Fairfield County, Connecticut, becoming the spot for several strange sightings. First, we heard from police officer Robert Klein, who recorded this video of lights in the sky after he says the initial light flew away from his police cruiser back in 2022.
There was a really strong light. It lit up the entire cab of my cruiser, to the point where I was having a hard time driving because I really couldn't see it. I was blinded by it. It was a perfect sphere, and it almost looked like plasma moving constantly. And I was perplexed and confused at what I was looking at.
Reenactment video shows what Officer Klein says he saw. He was barely into the midnight shift when he says his patrol car was filled with a bright light. It changed colors and then zipped across the reservoir.
I've been doing this job for 25 years. I've seen my fair share of drones, meteors, and everything else. And I knew that this was something that I've never come across. It wasn't a drone. I can guarantee you that. And it was something I still to this day, I'm perplexed. And like I said, I was fairly close to this thing, 30 feet. I got a very close-up view of it, and I froze. I wasn't in fear. I just was really trying to understand what exactly I was looking at. And to this day, I'm just perplexed by it.
We visited the area with a UFO investigation team made up of a former FBI agent, Navy veteran, and former NASA contractor, and interviewed Diane, who saw similar lights at a nearby community center.
So where was
the initial light came from this direction.
Okay.
And it was kind of moving back and forth here and there. And then when it came over to here, I noticed it was two.
So it kind of wavered back and forth?
Yes, because when it was out so far, that's why I thought it was a plane, because I'm like watching it. I'm like, what is that? Trying to figure out what direction it's going, because that's not a usual direction for an airplane, I don't think, like around here.
Digging into newspaper archives, it became clear that Officer Klein and Diane were not the first to see the unexplained lights. 50 years of strange encounters was the front page headline about a decade ago in the Reading Pilot newspaper. They documented decades of similar sightings in the same area. In 1966, a dentist spotted a large triangular glow. In 1974, a man spots a bright greenish blue light. There was a saucer-shaped object in 1976, a large yellowish ball in 1985. In 2011, something much brighter than any airplane lights flashing and drifting very slowly. And then in 2013 and 2014, journalist Christopher Burns took these photos of a strange orange light over the reservoir.
We would go out there and like maybe 50% of the time you would see this orange orb that just floated just above the tree line on the other side of the reservoir.
Burns has since moved to Boston, and we spoke on Zoom about what he saw.
Extremely bright orange orbs. It would be the most basic description.
What's the closest that anyone you remember has reported getting to this?
There was a reporter that I was able to reach, so a reporter who had worked at the newspaper I was currently working at. He worked there in the 80s. And he reported basically that a trio of lights, it seems to often be reported as one or three. He reported basically exactly what you just described about the police officer, that it followed him home basically on Valley Forge Road for like about 10 minutes. I don't remember whether he said anything about it lighting up his car, but that is the story I think that as you interview more local people, you're going to hear more of.
In your reporting, were there ever any explanations that you came across? Did anyone ever have an explanation of what it was?
No. It's too weird when you see it. It doesn't adhere to anything.
Very strange for now. This one remains a mystery. We're going to keep looking up at the skies, bring you any new information, obviously, as it appears. And by the way, Ashleigh Banfield lives very close to that reservoir. So we'll see if Ashleigh has any sightings of her own. All right, coming up with more reported sightings and very few answers from the government. The drone mystery that began over New Jersey continues to grow, leaving conspiracy theories to fill in the blanks. But what's in the sky above us on a regular night? It's actually more than you would think. We're going to look into that coming up next.
We have one more act for you this evening. I don't even need to say his name. Mr. Bob Dylan.
From the director of Walk the Line and Ford vs. Ferrari.
If anyone is going to hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
Inspired by the true story.
I want to know which side he's on.
This Christmas.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my life.
Bobby, what do you want to be?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
He's our Elvis.
With no direction.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro.
Make some noise, BD. Track some mud on the carpet.
A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17 not admitted without parent.
On this date in 1903, Wilbur and Orville took turns piloting the first mechanical airplane in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and the skies have not been the same since. Tonight, there is no end in sight to the drone mystery that began in New Jersey and spread across the country in less than a month. The government says there's nothing mysterious or hostile about them. In fact, President Biden, he has now spoken out for the first time about the drones. He said, quote, "We are following this closely, but so far no sense of danger." The truth is nobody else is convinced, and conspiracy theories are abound. A New Jersey mayor today claimed that radioactive material used for medical equipment was lost in transit 2 weeks ago, and the drone sightings could actually be linked to that, or most likely not. To understand what actually is in the sky above us on any given day or night, and there's a lot of stuff up there. I turn now to Will Austin, chief pilot for Warren Unmanned Aircraft Systems and an expert on drones. Dr. Austin, it's nice to see you. First of all, I'm curious, what is your impression of this big phenomena? All these people for the last couple of weeks filming and seeing these strange lights and drones in the sky. What do you think's behind it?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not surprised. I expected this to come when I got into the drones about 9 years ago. Maybe not to this extent, but I definitely expected it. I personally looked at the video, and I have seen mainly airplanes misidentified as drones most of the time. And that's not uncommon when we're looking up at the sky at night. What I think we can say with some certainty is if you're close to an airport, we have a lot of air traffic controllers there who are controlling that sky, and they know what's up there because they get reports not only from radar but also from the pilots. So I think the overwhelming evidence is right now it's misidentification. When we look at the federal tracking that went over the weekend, we only had 12 drones up on Saturday and 1 drone up on Sunday. So I think we can say that, but that will never change people's perception. When I looked at the sky and I looked at the video, I saw airplanes. But when dear friends, close people to me looked up, including my own wife, and saw it, she saw drones. And that's not going to change. And I think some of this fear comes from our apprehension about this new technology, but also from the fact that I think we've realized our adversaries are way ahead of us in this technology. We have not invested in manufacturing. We have not invested in development. We have not invested in safety and security in terms of our civil infrastructure to identify these. And we have not invested at all in the training.
Well, most of the drones that we can buy at the store, they come from China, right? Aren't they all made pretty much in China?
I would say the vast majority of the under 55-pound drones that you're seeing that probably you bought off Amazon came from China. Probably the majority came from a company called DJI, which has very close personal relation to the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, it's alarming. So you mentioned, I mean, you believe most of what people are seeing are planes. Is there anything else out there? I mean, I know some people have talked about Starlink satellites. What else is out there that people could be misidentifying?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in New Jersey, especially in clear nights, because we had a lot of them that have misidentified Jupiter as a drone. There are drones, though. I mean, people are putting up drones. While I was waiting here, a dear friend sent me pictures. It was definitely 3 drones. They were small drones. I think we're seeing a lot more teenagers doing this. But I think what we want to do is, instead of being afraid, we need to remember who we were once. Let's be fearless at this point, and let's say, you know what? We know other people are ahead of us. Let's take this as our Sputnik moment. Let's put science and math back to the forefront of our education. Let's put robotics in our schools. Let's prepare our civil defense against these machines. And let's remember who we are and what we're capable of. Because as I often tell the students, these machines are here to stay. If we said, let's ban all drones in the United States, that won't stop our adversaries. They are moving far ahead in this. So we have to embrace this, and we have to become masters of the machines before the machines master us.
Yeah, it's a good point. Real quick, one thing I think of, though, is even though obviously a lot of people are misidentifying things and they maybe don't look up that much, and now they're seeing a plane and think it's a drone. But I do have some good friends, Dr. Austin, who are smart and they really believe that they have seen something strange with these drones, the way that they were flying, the formation, especially over New Jersey. I mean, could it be the case that most of what people are seeing are planes, but there's still something shady going on in some of the cases?
I mean, that's the problem we have right now without the infrastructure. This will end with mystery in the end, unless something falls out of the sky. We will probably never know. I suspect these will start to disappear, these sightings, after Christmas. A little bit right after Christmas, it'll probably rise up when kids got drones for Christmas. Maybe you want to hold that drone off till the spring if you're going to give it to your child. But I think we're going to see this. So I think what we have to say is, we're never going to know, but we can know the future. We can control the future. We can do what my old teacher, Frank Garoof, he said when I was in high school at St. Augustine outside Atlantic City. He said, Will, don't ever let anything without a brain outsmart you. Yeah. So let's become smarter than everybody else. Let's become smarter than our adversaries, and let's take it our passion for the country back, and let's remember who we are and what we're capable of.
Yeah, we don't want to try to outsmart us. Dr. Austin, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, still ahead tonight, Luigi Mangione has been called a lot of things since his arrest 8 days ago in Pennsylvania. A mad genius, cold-blooded killer. Amazingly, some call the alleged CEO killer a hero. I can't believe it. So crazy. Tonight, the state of New York is calling him something else entirely, which could take his potential punishment to a whole new level. The details on that next.